Okay, well, let's get started. So we're moving on through our journey through the book of Daniel, and we're at a very unique place in the book because, the Daniel is not in chronological order. Basically, it's in two sections. You have the first six chapters are kind of the life of Daniel. It's the historical part of it. But then starting in chapter 7 through the end of the book, these next six chapters are basically visions and prophecies that he had along the way. And so they're kind of like we've already had the season. This is bonus episodes. So we'll try to make some sense of it. This one is, I'm going to title The Four Beasts. And I really emphasize going back and looking at your notes and studying chapter 2, because chapter 7 is going to be linked together with that. So it really helps you understand chapter 7 if you have at least kind of an idea of chapter 2. And we'll go through some of this. But let's look at this right here. So here's the outline of the book so far. Chapter 1, Daniel, it starts. He's about 14 years old. He's living in Jerusalem, living the good life, part of the royal family, and his city gets taken over by the king of Babylon. And he comes in there, he gets kidnapped, him and 3 of his buddies, along with some others, and they get taken hostage and taken over to Babylon, and that's where he'll spend the rest of his life. And soon after that, there is an event that happens to where the king of Babylon gets a dream. We're going to talk about this tonight a lot, but he gets his dream and he sees this metal man statue, a statue that has different metals. This man has different, is made up of different metals, I should say. And a big rock comes and smashes the statue into bits, and then that rock grows to cover the whole earth. So it's a weird dream. He doesn't know what it is. And he wants all his little insiders there, his magicians and sorcerers, to interpret the dream, and they can't. So he's going to kill them all, Daniel included. Daniel goes home, him and his buddies, they pray about it, and God gives him the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, plus how to interpret it. And so Daniel saves the day and interprets this. And this is going to be kind of like a foundation for everything that we're going to be doing moving forward throughout the book. So chapter 2 is big. I'll come back to that in a second. Chapter 3 was the famous fiery furnace. Daniel's 3 buddies, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they get themselves into their own death penalty, and then they get out of there. So famous story. They were saved by someone. And when you read through chapter 3, it's interesting who saved them, who was in the fire with them. And there's a great lesson to be learned from that. Chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar has his own ordeal and 7 years of insanity. He writes, the interesting thing about chapter 4 is it's not written by Daniel. It is written by a Gentile king, a pagan king, a non-believing king, although you could read chapter 4 and you might think that he is no longer just a Gentile. He may be a believer. He may be in heaven. So we'll see when we get there. Chapter 5 was the fall of Babylon, the famous writing on the wall that Daniel interprets it, and that led to the takeover of the Persian Empire, so in chapter 6, he is now in the Persian Empire, and then once again faces the jaws of death, literally, in the lion's den. So that was basically his life. Now we're going to go back and look at chapter 7. And so if you want to look at this kind of like how it's all connected, chapter 2's vision and prophecy of the metal man statue is connected to chapter 7. So you really, one helps you understand the other. Also, most of the Bible, most of the Old Testament is written in Hebrew. The New Testament in the Greek, Old Testament Hebrew, except for a section or two. This section right here, Daniel starts off in Hebrew, and there's a certain verse in chapter 2 where the language switches to Aramaic, which is kind of like the Gentile language of the day. Think about how a lot of countries speak English, right? Well, a lot of countries spoke Aramaic. And so the language at a certain verse switches from English to Aramaic, and it will be that way through chapter 7. But then starting next chapter, it will switch to Hebrew. Why does the Holy Spirit do that? Well, the emphasis is going to shift. This is interesting. The emphasis is on Israel, and most of the Old Testament is focused on Israel. But then at a certain verse in chapter 2, the subject shifts from Israel to the Gentiles. And for nearly 5 chapters, the focus is on the times of the Gentiles. But then it's going to shift back to Israel from chapter 8 on. So pretty interesting. So I mentioned there's these 2 sections. First 6 are historical, and the next 6 are going to be prophetic. If you want to look at these in chronological order, this is how it would break down. So we're going to be in chapter 7, and next week, chapter 8. And these 2 chapters happen after Nebuchadnezzar wrote his testimony in chapter 4 and before the fall of Babylon. So he's in still the Babylonian Empire when these next 2 visions come, but then Babylon will fall. He'll be taken over by Persia, and then chapter 9 will happen after that. So it's kind of like a breakdown if you want to read this chronologically. So we're going to look at the 4 beasts. What does this mean? Well, this could all be capped together as the times of the Gentiles. So just to kind of get a big picture view of it, Daniel is a Jew. He's in the royal line somehow, apparently. And Israel gets taken over. They get taken into captivity. But Daniel receives these visions, and it's basically the end time scenario. There's going to be these empires, a succession of empires that happen that leads to the final world empire. So yeah, some of them are kind of like our past: Persia, Greece, Rome, all that stuff. But he's getting a vision of how it's all going to lay out to the very end. And eventually, the world empires are going to be conquered by Jesus Christ, who will set up his own millennial kingdom. That's kind of the big picture of it. Where does this phrase come from? It comes from Luke. He talks about this, which says, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. There is a time where that will be fulfilled, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So give that picture. That's where the phrase comes from. I didn't make it up myself. So this is that metal man statue I talked about in chapter 2. You've got the head of gold, which was Babylon. That's, Daniel's told that. They are going to be conquered by a second empire representing the chest and arms of silver, and this should be called the Medo-Persia Empire. I put Persia on there, but that's kind of what that was the stronger of the 2, but it's really the Medo-Persia Empire. So it's the arms of silver, who would be taken over down the road by the Greek Empire. That was the belly and thighs of bronze. And then eventually the Roman Empire will conquer the Greek Empire, and the Iron Legion, the legs of iron. Now, I say Rome 2.0. There's not really a 5th empire. Each of these, if you don't like history, I mean, history can be a little overwhelming. I get it. But at least kind of get this. Each of these this is a succession of empires. Persia conquered Babylon, Greece conquered Persia, Rome conquered Greek. Who conquered the Roman Empire? Well, the western part of the Roman Empire didn't get conquered. They broke into pieces. It broke apart into England and France and Spain and Germany. Get it? So, but apparently, according to chapter 2, and what you'll see also tonight in chapter 7, is that this Roman Empire, in some form or fashion, is going to realign down the road. There's going to be a revived Roman Empire, most believe, whether that's a European superstate or something. There's going to be some, but it's not a 5th empire. It's just a coming back together of the 4th empire, Rome. So it's not really a 5th one. I didn't sketch that just right. And we're going to focus on this one because this applies to us. The rest of them are part of our history. It's cool to see, but it's already happened. We're looking forward at this, what is coming down the road for us. Notice this right here. We're going to get into you've got metal man statues. You got beasts we're going to look at tonight, lions and tigers and bears and stuff like that. It can be like, wow, I don't get it. What's all this mean? And you're trying to interpret all these prophecies, and we're going to be looking at them tonight, next week, chapter 9, on and on and on through the end of the book. And it can be like, I just don't get it. Why is it so hard? Why not just come out and say, for example, here's the name of the Antichrist, and here's the year he's going to show up, right? Like, why not just put it out there? This is what Proverbs 25:2 says. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. It is his glory to hide things, and the glory of us to search them out, or the glory of kings. Think about this. think about the kingdom parables. Why did Jesus speak in parables? Do you know, all my life, I had one thought. I thought up until about 2019, I truly believed that that these parables were just kind of like little cool stories to teach a point. I mean, you can make a case they are, but it's so much more than that. Because, you know, Jesus in this ministry, up until, like, let's take the book of Matthew, the first 12 chapters, or at least once he starts his ministry, all the way through chapter 12, he is preaching to the crowds, right? He's given the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount, and he's doing all these, you know, sophisticated teachings, and he's preaching to them. But then an event happens in chapter 12, and that starts to change. And from chapter 12 on, he only speaks to the crowds in parables. That's it. And it's different. And his disciples are like, whoa, like, what's changed here? Why is he, you know, giving all these parables? And they come and ask him about it. It says, disciples came and asked him, why do you use parables when you talk to the people? He replied, and this is the key point. You, disciples, you know, think to yourself as you read this. Are you a disciple? Are you a disciple of the Lord? You are permitted to understand the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but others, they are not. You see, this is, you could wrap this up in, my sheep hear my voice, but others do not. He is, you'll understand if you go back and you study chapter 13, that he is, the word parable actually means parabola. It's where we get parabolic. It's basically a way of going around through the back door. He is hiding the truth wrapped in a secret so that only his sheep hear. It's really interesting. Interesting concept. But that's kind of like, I point that out because that's a little bit how God does prophecy. People because honestly, like this book can get complex, right? It can get hard to understand. How do you understand? How do you unlock the secrets of the Bible? Really easy. You have a teacher. You have someone that explains it all. And it's a gift from God. It's called the Holy Spirit, who is there to teach us about Scripture. Powerful concept and a powerful combination. The Spirit of Christ and his Scripture. That's how you learn, right? So you don't have to have PhDs and doctorates and all this stuff to understand the Bible. That's fine. That's great. But, you know, you don't have to have your master's degree in theology to understand this book. You have, if you're a believer, the Holy Spirit. So anyway, hope that makes sense. As we get into prophecy, just understand it is the glory of God to conceal things and our privilege to seek them out. And that's what we're going to try to do. So tonight's task, identifying the cast of characters in Daniel 7. And we're going to look at a couple things. So this builds upon the middleman statue, which was for the next four empires, Gentile empires, I should say. Who are going to be these four beasts? Now, right off the bat, even saying that, there was a middleman statue that had four metals that represented the coming four empires. And now you've got four beasts. So these are going to be linked. The lion, the bear, the leopard, and this last one is just called the beast because it's not really an animal that Daniel can identify. Who are these four beasts? That's a task. Are these beasts, are these empires, I should say, are they future or past? Some say these have all happened in the past. Some believe these are yet to come. What are the 10 horns? We're going to find this final beast has 10 horns. Well, what's the connection there? The middleman statue, you know, head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, but then the feet and toes was iron mixed with clay. So the 10 toes, are they connected with the 10 horns? But who is this little horn that's going to pop up? And the little horn of Daniel 7 is one of the things you really want to get from this. And when does this heavenly courtroom scene that we're going to see, this divine council, when does this take place? So these are some things. I don't know that we can answer them all, but we're going to give it our best shot. So let's get a perspective here. there's a little flow. There's a little, I don't want to say story, but there's the series of events. So in Daniel chapter 2, you get this image, talked about that, the metal man statue, but that's not where the dream ends. There was a rock that came and smashed the statue, broke it into pieces. And that rock, whatever or whoever the rock is, grew to cover the entire earth. That's the pattern. So you have these successive empires, and at the end, the rock comes and smashes it. So you got the world empires. The rock, we learned, represents Jesus. Jesus is the rock. After all these empires, Jesus crushes the Gentile empires and sets up his eternal kingdom. Okay? So I just wanted you to kind of see that. World empires, Christ comes, conquers all them, sets up his millennial kingdom. Okay? Daniel chapter 7. If you start to get lost along the way, and I do a horrible job of explaining it, just know this is the pattern. Successive empires, Christ comes and conquers, sets up his millennial kingdom. Okay, with me? And we're going to look at it through these beasts, the lion, the bear, the leopard, and this final beast, then the 10 horns and little horn. Now, can you see kind of like this, help see a little bit? Babylon and the lion are going to be linked. Persia and the bear are going to be linked. Greece and the leopard linked. Rome and this fourth beast linked. And then the Rome 2.0, the 10 toes or the iron mixed with clay is linked with the 10 horns and the little horn, right? So that's the successive empires. In chapter 2, it's the rock, Jesus Christ, comes and smashes those empires. Chapter 7, you get a different perspective of the same thing. Jesus is still going to come, but what you're going to discover is someone called the Ancient of Days that we'll read about will take his seat in a courtroom, a heavenly courtroom. Books will be opened, and the Son of Man will be given the power to set up his kingdom. It's the same thing. The rock that smashed the statue is the same equivalent to that. Okay, does that make sense? And then the rock in chapter 2 covered the whole earth, and now you're going to see its everlasting dominion, never pass away, never destroyed. It's the same pattern. As long as you get the pattern down, everything kind of fits into place. So with that, let's jump into chapter 7, verse 1, and kind of keep that pattern in mind. So verse 1, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay on his bed. Then he wrote the dream down and related the following summary of it. You know, some people, they have this discussion. Well, was it a dream? Was it a vision? I mean, look, he's laying on his bed, and I don't know that it matters which one it is. But he gets a dream. He's had them before. And one of the things to keep in mind is Daniel was giving a spiritual gift. And what was that? Dream interpretation. That was a spiritual gift. Way back when he was 14, Belshazzar had the metal man statue dream. He interpreted. So this seems to be how God communicates what he wants him to write down is through his dreams. Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. So you got the four winds of heaven, and you got a great sea. What is that? Well, there's a lot of, and you're going to see there's a lot of debate on all this stuff, a lot of ways of interpreting. The four winds of heaven could be just the four directions. But this great sea we talk about, this is one part literal, one part allegory. The great sea throughout the Bible is always the Mediterranean Sea, the Mediterranean. And it's interesting that these four empires that we're talking about were all built around the Mediterranean, all four of them, from Babylon, Greece, Persia, Rome, all that. But there's also more than that. The Great Sea is also kind of used metaphorically as the world. So in one sense, these four empires are part of the world. They're not Israel. They're not the Jews. They're not God's chosen people. They are the Gentile world, right? So it is kind of metaphorical in a sense. They come from the world, but it's also interesting that they're all on the Mediterranean Sea itself. And four great beasts were coming up from the sea. So the four beasts are coming up from the sea, again, which represents the world. And these four beasts are going to be different from each other. Okay, the first beast. The first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind also was given to it. You're going to get the interpretation from this later on. This is Babylon. This is just like Daniel was told, hey, the head of gold, which is going to be the greatest of the empires, is Babylon. And here you've got a lion and an eagle as the interpretation. So instead of a metal man image, you're getting animals. But look at the animals. The lion, the king of the jungle, right? And the eagle, which is the king of the air. So you've got these two illustrations. I mean, obviously he's seeing this beast, but it's a winged eagle. And notice its wings were plucked, right? And it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. If you think back to chapter 4, I think this is kind of linked in there. What happened to Nebuchadnezzar? God said, you're going to be the greatest of all the empires, the most powerful. You're the head of gold. All the others are going to be inferior to you. And yet at his height of arrogance, he was humbled and he was given this insanity, this disease. I think it was called lycanthropy. He was given that for 7 years. It's an actual mental disease where the victim or patient believes they're like a cattle or I can't think what else it was. Not a dog, but I think a cattle or ox or something like that. They eat grass and crawl on the ground. But then what happened to Nebuchadnezzar in the story? When he humbled himself, he was given his mind back and he stood up. So this is just kind of like summarizing chapter 4. So that's the first beast. Keep that in mind. So that's going to be Babylon. And this is the Babylonian Empire. You can kind of see where it's stretched from. Babylon is over in modern day Iraq, but the whole Babylonia kind of covers that Middle Eastern section all the way down into Egypt. Okay, here comes the second beast, again, out of the great sea. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, get up and eat your fill of flesh. This is going to be also interpreted. This is going to be the next empire, which was the Persians, which conquered them. And it's interesting, as you look at their empire, got even larger. It was made up of Media and Persia. Notice in the metal man statue, what was Persia? The arms of silver, the 2 sides. And here you've got a bear who's raised up on one side. Why is that important? It's a little bit more insight. There were 2 countries that came together to make the Media-Persia Empire, but Persia came to grow stronger and it rose up faster and than the Media. The 3 ribs. It's also interesting. There were 3 countries that that Persia conquered to become an empire, and that was I think Babylon, Libya, and Egypt. Okay, those 3. So it's interesting that the 3 countries or the 3 nations that conquered to become an empire, the 3 ribs in its mouth, and one up one side. So it's an illustration. Okay, here comes third beast. After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard. And on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. Now, again, all this is going to be interpreted, so I'm just kind of going through this. So this is going to be the Alexander the Great and the Greek Empire. And you remember it was the belling thighs of bronze. This one, it looked like a leopard. A leopard is the fastest of the animals, right? And what's interesting, you're going to get this now and in chapter 8. Greece is always going to be illustrated with fast. So fast. In chapter 8, he'll get another vision of a goat that moves so fast it doesn't touch the ground. Here it's a leopard that moves fast. But what happens to Alexander the Great is he rises to power, conquers the earth, but then as a young guy, he dies. And so who do we give the empire to, Alexander? He says, give it to the strong. They basically broke it up into his 4 generals, took the Greek Empire. And so again, this is all illustration, the four wings, the four empires, and all that. Okay, there you go. That's the Greek Empire stretched all the way from Greece all the way to India. And when he died at age 32, by the way, I mean, this guy, we'll study more on this in chapter 8. He conquered the whole world in 9 years. 9 years, conquered the whole world. It's amazing. And then these were his four generals, and they basically took each section of the empire. So that's the first three. This is pretty easy. I mean, so far you got Babylon. This is all history. I mean, you can get into a world history book and know Babylon, Persia, Greece. Here comes this fourth beast, though. And if you remember, in the Metal Man statue, it was the legs of iron, but then the iron mixed with clay was the feet and ankles. So it was like iron, but then something else. Here, you've got what? A lion, you got a bear, you got a leopard. This one, there's something different about it. Again, I think this ties back to the Metal Man statue. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a fourth beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. See the linkage, the legs of iron, this is the iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. And again, this is so many comparisons to the Roman Empire, because all these other empires had different ways they would conquer people. Some of them, Babylon would go in and steal the best kids, the best artifacts, the gold. Not Rome. They would crush and destroy everything. And that's what this beast right here does. But notice what it says. It was different from all the former beasts. And the Roman Empire, you'll find, was different than the other three. It had 10 horns. And so this is this Rome and Rome 2.0. Rome was never conquered and crushed by another empire. It broke into pieces. And those pieces at some point in time in our future are going to come back together. And there's going to be some aspect of 10 to it. So that's the fourth beast. So here was the Roman Empire. Notice these empires progressively moved to the west. But then, and I didn't put it in here, but it basically splits into an eastern and western side of it. And the western part broke up into these countries, Britain and Gaul and Spain and Mauritania. So there you go. Okay. Now, verse 8. So far, it's been kind of these empires, the successive empires, right? And in the Metal Man statue in chapter 2, you got just the four empires, and then Christ comes and smashes and sets up the millennial kingdom. This chapter adds on to it, because these 10 horns, just like the 10 toes of the statue and the 10 horns of this beast, that's kind of what we got from chapter 2. But here comes something different. When I was thinking about the horns, there before was another horn, a little one, which came up among the 10 horns, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes of a human being and a mouth that spoke boastfully. So basically, these next few verses, so many theories, speculation about it. But let's take this a little bit of time. So there's this fourth empire is going to have 10 parts to it. But out of the 10 parts, there's going to be one horn that comes up, the little horn. What happens? It takes 3 of the first horns out, which means there's only 7. And if you've ever kind of went through Revelation, you know that the Antichrist is going to come up out of this one world government, and there's going to be 3 of the kings that he takes out. But look at this last sentence here. This horn had eyes of a human being. Well, that's interesting. Eyes of a human being? Does it mean it's not a human being? But notice this last phrase, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. This is one of a personality trait of the little horn, because you're going to get this in Revelation. You're going to get this in chapter 8 of Daniel, of him speaking boastfully. Sometimes your translation may say he speaks arrogantly. He speaks brash. He's bold. And it repeats this over and over again. So much so that, I nickname this guy Sir Brag-a-lot because he's always bragging. Daniel will talk about this a lot. John will describe this guy, and he'll describe him the same way, speaking boastfully. So that's just a nickname to him. Okay, so that's verse 8. A little horn comes up out of the 10 horns. Now, the scene starts to shift. You got these successive empires. You got this last one that has kind of 10 parts to it. And one horn pops up out of it, speaking boastfully. But now, verse 9, we shift. And it says, as I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. You need to know who the Ancient of Days was. It's one of the things we talked about the first. Understand the cast of characters. This Ancient of Days is God himself. God is going to take the seat in this heavenly throne room. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. So it's a scene, Daniel seeing in this heavenly courtroom scene. Now, what's going to happen? Verse 10. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands and thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. So you've got a courtroom scene here. Verse 11. Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. So while this heavenly courtroom scene's going on, this horn is bragging again. I kept looking until the beast was slain. So, wow, okay. So let's get the cast of characters again. You got the little horn. Remember, this fourth beast wasn't like the others. It wasn't a lion. It wasn't the bear. It wasn't the leopard. It was a beast. And this beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. Now, again, this is Daniel's getting a vision. What he's getting is actually the truth of what's happening in our future, and it's hidden, just like Christ's parables. Here's the parable of, the lost coin, or here's the parable of the mustard tree. Well, those were truth that was wrapped in a story. Here you're getting the same thing. You're getting the actual truth of what's going to happen in our future wrapped up in an image of animals. But you can tell here, this beast, this empire is going to be destroyed, and it will be thrown into the blazing fire. And if you study, Revelation chapter 17 and 18, you get the lake of fire and what's going to go into the lake of fire. Here's what it says. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. So these other world empires maybe are allowed to function for a period of time. We're going to come back to that. Let me just put this out there like so. Each of these empires, from Babylon to Persia to Greece to Rome, they never really went away. So this is just one interpretation of it. But you can make a case. Babylon lives on today. We follow and adopt a lot of the Babylonian traditions right now. The fact that we have 60 seconds and 60 minutes and an hour and all the mathematics goes back to Babylon. The astrological science goes back to Babylon. So there's a lot of Babylon that lives with us. Persia, same thing. Persia didn't, delete all of Babylon. They took that with them. And in Persia, all of their traditions and science went with them into the Greek Empire, Greek into Rome, right? Just think about the Roman Empire and the Roman mythology. All of the Roman gods, they were the same as the Greek gods. They just changed the names. Instead of Zeus, we'll call it Jupiter. It's the same thing. It's all the same. So that's one possible interpretation of that phrase there. Verse 13 now, so he's got these four beasts. He saw a little horn. He saw a courtroom scene. This is back to this courtroom scene, verse 13. He says, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. Son of man, coming on the clouds. Does that ring a bell? He approached the Ancient of Days, and that is God, and was led into his presence. Here's what he's given. Here's what the Ancient of Days gives him. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshiped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. So he's giving the power to rule the earth. So we kind of interpret along the way, but Daniel gets the interpretation of it in this section right here. Verse 15 says, I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one, this is his dream or vision. I approached one of those standing there. So apparently there's people around, and asked him the meaning of this. So he told me, love to know who this was. So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. The four great beasts are four kings that will arise from the earth, right? Nebuchadnezzar brought the Babylonian Empire. Cyrus the Great, we read about him, the Persian Empire. Alexander the Great, the Greek Empire, and on and on. But the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever. The holy people of the Most High. The Most High, his holy people, an everlasting kingdom. Then I wanted to know the meaning of the fourth beast. This is interesting because Daniel doesn't ask about the first, second, or third one because it's pretty clear, right? He's had probably, I don't know how many years down the road this is, probably at least 40 years later that he's had that middleman statue in his brain. So he's kind of, plus he already knows that Persia eventually is going to overcome Babylon. But that being said, he's interested in the fourth beast, and that's good because that's the one we need to know, which was different from all the others and most terrifying with its iron teeth and bronze claws. The beast that crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. I also want to know about the 10 horns on its head and about the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell. The horn had looked more imposing than the others, and that had eyes and mouth that spoke boastfully. Wow. So this is really good for us. So once again, speaking boastfully. So once again, Sir Brag-a-lot. Verse 21. As I watched, this horn was waging war against the holy people and overpowering them. Okay, so verse 21 is hard to wrap your mind around. So once again, Sir Brag-a-lot. So once again, Sir Brag-a-lot. Verse 21, as I watched, this horn was waging war against the holy people and overpowering them. Now, this right here, let's get this concept of what's going on. The little horn, which you're going to learn is the Antichrist, is waging war against who? The holy people. Who are the holy people? Okay, whoever they are, they're being overpowered. Okay, until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the holy people of the Most High, and the time came when they possessed the kingdom. In other words, the holy people are going to be persecuted by the Antichrist until God pronounces judgment. That's what that's telling. So let's go through it. They're overpowering them. That's the problem. He gave me this explanation. The fourth beast is a fourth kingdom that will appear on earth. It will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. After them, after who? After the 10 kings that come from this fourth empire. That's why I call it Rome 2.0. But after them, another king will rise. It's not the 10. He will be different from the earlier ones, and he will subdue 3 of those 10 kings. He will speak against the Most High and oppress his holy people and try to change the set times and the laws. The holy people will be delivered into his hands for a time, times, and half a time. Man, so much right here. All right. So a lot of different interpretations of it. I'm going to kind of give you some ideas. But essentially, the little horn of Daniel 7, most believe to be the Antichrist. Most. And the Antichrist is going to speak against not just the people, but against God himself. He's going to oppress his holy people and try to change the times and the laws. Okay? But let's get to this right here. The holy people will be delivered in his hands for a time, times, and half a time. This is one of the most detailed, chronicled period of time in all of biblical history. Now, this times, time, and half a time. This describes the most detailed period of time in the entire Bible. What does this mean? Well, okay, remember this is English translation, but in the original language, time meant a year. So we're talking about a year of time, or time represents a year. Now the word times is different. Think about, if I said, I'm going to have some friends, plural, come to Bible boot camp next week, that's more than one. But if I say, both of them show up, well, you get that both means two. All would be more than two, right? So we don't really have kind of word for this, but just understand times meant two. So time is one, times is two. So times, and half a time is 1 time, 2 times. 1 plus 2 is 3, and 3.5. This is where we get this 3.5 years. But the Holy Spirit uses this all throughout the Bible. Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 12, and Revelation 12 will use this term time, times, and half a time. But that's also another way of saying what we're going to see here. The Holy Spirit also refers to this as 3.5 years, which is Daniel 9, and Daniel chapter 12 uses that expression. It's also described as 42 months. Revelation 11 and chapter 13 talks about that. It's also described as 1,260 days, according to Revelation 11 and Daniel 12. I mean, it's put in years, months, days. It's everything but the number of minutes. Like, it's very detailed. It's also called half a week in Daniel chapter 9. So this is all the same period of time. 42 months, 1,260 days, all of that is 3.5 years, and it describes the worst period of time in human history, according to Jesus, known as the Great Tribulation. It's all the same thing. Hope that makes sense. Okay, verse 26. But the court will sit, and its power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. We're talking about the little horn. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all the kingdom under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High. His kingdom, the Son of Man, will be an everlasting kingdom, and the rulers will worship and obey him. This is the end of the matter. I, Daniel, was deeply troubled by my thoughts, and my face turned pale, but I kept the matter to myself. So what a vision. So Daniel is getting a vision, not just of his time, but in his near future, but to the end of time, our future. He is seeing all this. He's seeing it in two different ways, but it's the same period of time. So let's go back to this right here and kind of fill in the gaps. You had the metal man statue that represented these successive empires. And here we see the gold was Babylon, and it's represented as a winged lion. The bear on one side was a silver, 2 empires, one stronger than the other. The leopard that moves very fast, the Greek Empire, conquered the world in under 9 years. The iron legion of Rome, the legs of iron, and we see that its jaws and teeth were of iron, the terrible beast. But then here's the key here. All these are part of our history. This is the key we got to focus in on. This metal man statue, it's iron mixed with clay. It's some type of combination of something else that makes this revived Roman Empire. And the terrible beast ends up having these 10 heads or 10 horns. And a little horn pops out of it. So that's the big focus of all this. We'll take a look real quick here. Revelation 13, that kind of expands on what we just read here. Now, this is John. Okay, so Daniel saw that vision. John gets a different kind of vision. And John, many believe he's transported forward into time, and he's writing what he sees. Here's what he says in chapter 13. Then I saw a beast rising up out of the sea. Well, that's kind of what Daniel saw. It had 7 heads and 10 horns. Now, think about this. Wasn't there 10 heads? Daniel, right? 10 horns. But apparently 3 of them were taken out. With 10 crowns on its horns, and written on each head were names that blasphemes God. Out of the sea, and this is actually this angelo, this therion. By the way, we translate it as beast, but in the Greek, the word beast doesn't necessarily mean like Godzilla beast. It could be microscopic. So, and out of the sea means it could be, honestly, it could be a virus. So when we say beast, we think of a monster, but it doesn't necessarily have, it comes from the word zoa, think protozoa, so microscopic. Verse 2, this beast looked like a leopard, but it had the feet of a bear and the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave the beast his own power and throne and great authority. Well, this is interesting because John is seeing this vision of these animals, and they're the same 3 that Daniel saw. Remember, he saw the lion and the bear and the leopard. John's seeing the same thing. But notice something. They're in reverse order. Daniel saw the lion and the bear and the leopard. John is seeing just the opposite. And the dragon, and if you study chapter 12, you realize that the dragon is the devil. So that's Satan. And he gives this beast, his power. So this is one thing we learn about this. The Antichrist is going to be superpowered or supernaturally powered, is the same. But this thing here, this leopard, bear, and lion, he's seeing it in a different order for some reason. Why is it in reverse order? Interesting here. Daniel and John are both looking at the end times, but Daniel is looking forward as it's coming. John has jumped forward in time and is seeing it from a reverse direction. He's looking backwards at it. Real interesting. 2 different takes of the same thing, right? Imagine if you're standing on one side of the street, your neighbor's on the other side, and you both see a car wreck. You see different perspectives of that car wreck. And the tribulation is like a car wreck. So there you go. Verse 3 of Revelation here. I saw one of the heads of the beast seemed wounded beyond recovery, but the fatal wound was healed. The whole world marveled at this miracle and gave allegiance to the beast. The little horn of Daniel 7 is the same beast you're seeing here in Revelation 13. It describes the Antichrist. This Antichrist is going to either apparently seem to be killed, or he's actually going to be killed, but he's going to have a miraculous recovery, a superhuman feat, and he will have a fatal wound. And the whole world will recognize this and give their allegiance to him. So it's going to be something, I mean, to be honest with you, like, our world is not prepared for a political leader who can raise people from the dead. We're not ready for that. And something's going to happen like this. So there's going to be some type of, he's going to be supernaturally powered. We just learned from Satan himself. They worship the dragon for giving the beast such power. Whatever he's going to do, people are going to be sold that, and I don't think they're going to worship the devil, so to speak. They're probably going to believe that he's Christ himself. Who is as great as the beast, they exclaimed. Who is able to fight against him? So this coming world leader, the beast of Revelation 13, is the same as the little horn of Daniel chapter 7. There's 33 references to this guy just in the Old Testament. We call him the Antichrist, but he's got a lot of other names. Son of perdition, man of sin, little horn of Daniel 7. There's 13 different titles of him in the New Testament. And apparently there is a physical description in the Bible of what he looks like. And we'll talk about that as we move forward. Revelation 13, verse 5. Then the beast was allowed to speak great blasphemies against God, and he was given authority to do whatever he wanted for 42 months. The 42 months, there's that 3.5 years. The Antichrist is going to be able to, God is going to give him his way. He's going to allow him to wreak havoc on the world and his holy people for a period of time. And he spoke terrible words of blasphemy against God, slandering his name and his dwelling. That is those who dwell in heaven. Now, depending on, there's different interpretations of when are we caught up in the clouds with Christ. When does he bring his bride up? Okay. You got the pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib. But apparently there are those who dwell in heaven that most likely have been raptured, and he is blaspheming them and God. So I don't know how that plays out, but I think once the church is removed from the earth, at whatever point in time that happens, I have my own ideas on it, but whenever that happens, that the beast will attack verbally Jesus and those who left. This is those who are left behind, right? He's going to verbally attack God and those who were raptured. Interesting. Verse 7, and the beast was allowed to wage war against God's holy people and to overpower them. Now, God's holy people, many believe that this is talking about who's his chosen people? Israel. Israel is not raptured. Israel suffers through this tribulation. And the point of them suffering is for them to reach a breaking point to where they seek God's help. And he was given authority to rule over every tribe and people and language and nation. And all the people who belong to this world worship the beast. They are the ones, and this is the verse of all verses right here. This verse 8 of chapter 13 is the most powerful verse I learned in 2020. That's it. It's changed my whole thinking of it. Think about what it says. And all the people who belong to this world worship the beast. They are the ones whose names were not written in the book of life. Okay, we've heard that expression, the book of life, right? And obviously, if these are the ones that are worshiping the Antichrist, they're not in the book of life. Their name's not in the book of life. But the ones that are, if you're a believer, your name is in the book of life. Okay, got it. When was your name written in the book of life? When you were saved? When you walked the aisle? When you were baptized? Maybe before you were born? No. Listen to what it says. The book of life that belongs to the Lamb who was slaughtered before the world was made. Your name was written in the book of life before the foundations of the world was laid. Get that concept. Before Genesis 1:1, God knew you and had chosen you and put your name in the book of life. That is a powerful perspective. The fact that the God of the universe already knew me, not when I was born, but before the world was made, before the foundation of the world was laid, and wrote my name in the book of life. When you face hardships, and you will tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, it's coming, understand that there is a God who wrote your name in the book of life, and that cannot be wiped clean. Love that one. Love that one. Next week, what we're going to do is we're going to look at another vision. It's going to give us even more insight. They're going to kind of build upon each other. The middleman statue was kind of a foundation. The four beasts give you a little bit more insight into it, and the little horn and the Antichrist and how all that plays out. Chapter 8 is going to give you even more insight. They're going to kind of stack together, and it lays out an awesome picture of what's coming down the road for us. So next week, I want you to read chapter 8, the ram and the goat. And what you're going to get is more details, not necessarily on the four empires, but on a few of them. Because Daniel is moving out of the first one, Babylon. He's about to become a prominent figure in the next empire in Persia. So we'll read about that. It's an amazing chapter. Some really cool things that have happened historically because of Daniel chapter 8. And we'll talk about that next week.